All right, welcome to our next episode of Avant-Garde Talk. We are here today talking about relationships, specifically with ADHD, because it's February and that's the theme of the month. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about specifically partner relationships where one or both partners have ADHD and what that looks like and how it impacts communication within a relationship.
You know, what comes to mind to me is, and I wonder sometimes in these conversations, is about bringing up what's the challenge? Mm-hmm. What comes to you all as what's the problem, what's the challenge? So then from there we can go to give you our tips and recommendations of what people could do.
Yeah. I think for the person in the relationship that has ADHD, criticism has often been so much a part of their experience. It's very easy to quickly interpret any kind of constructive comments or suggestions as hurtful and as criticism. Mm-hmm. And so being mindful of that, if you're the partner that's trying to communicate something that you feel needs to change or needs to be done in a different way or done at all, it would be helpful to keep that in mind, that the way you say things is very important.
Mm-hmm. So that awareness.
In ADHD relationships, a lot of the time, because somebody has a deficit in executive functioning, that means that probably there are things that they forget or probably things that they need to be reminded about that might be part of a regular routine. And in the context of a relationship, that creates frustration. And if that person doesn't take ownership of what's happening, then kind of by default, the other person is left to fill in the gap. Yeah. Which, if that happens without a conversation or some kind of awareness on both ends, it often leads to resentment because one person is kind of doing the best they can and the other person is seeing the things that are missing and doing them, but it often sounds like nagging and it sounds like criticism and correction, and that is unhelpful for everybody, really. And so what we wanted to focus in on is how to have conversations about just like routine things that need to change that are often make up kind of daily arguments, and how to have those conversations in a way that's more constructive and helpful instead of bringing down one person or just kind of having an argument that seems to repeat without a solution.
Absolutely. I think just communicating in general, communicating in general, making sure you're talking about it. I know a couple where one person had ADHD, the other one didn't, and mail kept getting misplaced. One person got angry. They decided to open a P.O. box so that they would have their mail somewhere else. But instead of talking about this and being kind of laughing and bringing humor into it, like, you know what, it's not a big deal, this keeps happening, here's a good solution, it ended up not being talked about and feelings were hurt.
And I think it goes to that. When I was hearing Ellie and what you brought, is there's two issues. The one is about communication. We need to feel comfortable and bring it up respectfully. Right. Because sometimes, and when we're in a good place, because if we're upset about the situation, mail, or you didn't buy the milk, or I always have to pick up your shoes, or whatever it is, we're going to be very reactive to the situation. So it's starting, where is a good time to talk about this? And then from communication is moving also to the part of how do we give a good compliment? How do we let them know when they're doing good and noticing? Because absolutely. I think that's the contrast in here is that we're really good to criticize. So let's move forward. So how do we can give a compliment? How do we do that?
I think one of the most important things is to just be positive. Right? Anytime that your partner does something that is good, say, hey, you know what, I noticed you cleaned the kitchen today. Thank you, I really appreciate it. Without saying, oh, I wish you would clean the kitchen all the time. That's kind of that ulterior motive of like, oh, maybe if I tell them this, they'll kind of clean the kitchen, maybe every once in a while, right? But for me, I'm like, if that was me, I would be like, well, I'm just not going to clean the kitchen ever, right? I mean, I'm sure some people have thought that way too, right? If you're going to criticize me after I did something good, why would I do the same thing again in order to be still criticized? Right. So it's kind of that just acknowledging and noticing and saying like, hey, you know what, that's awesome. I'm really glad that you did that. I really appreciate it, without having to kind of try and go in there and be like, well, maybe it could
Yeah,
be something.
it's
I
not a
haven't thought about.
conversation.
Right.
Giving a compliment is not a conversation.
I think that's the key, is that maybe the conversation needs to be had, but it needs to be had separately. Because that doesn't mean never talk about it. If this is an issue, only point it out when it happens good once in a blue moon, right? It means that, like, you might have to have a conversation about what's missing or what should be happening or what the problem is. But then once that's established and you're just noticing the good things, you just put it out there and leave it alone.
Mhm.
Not like you finally remembered because we talked about this 4 times,
Yeah.
or maybe now that you can do it, maybe now you can do it like you're supposed to.
Yeah.
Like those kind of things
Yeah.
Right.
really bring down the value of a compliment.
Mhm.
Well, because it's about the other person, right? You're giving the compliment to the other person. It's not for you. It's to kind of help to bring them up and kind of give them that confidence to where they can be like, oh, well, if she's going to tell me that, you know, I did an awesome job, I might do it again. Right?
Okay.
Because we want to feel good, right? If we get compliments, it kind of makes us feel good. So if we feel good, and the more that we kind of get that from our partner, the more that we would probably likely do that same behavior in the future.
And that's the intent. Again, we're very quick to criticize. So what we want here is that people to notice what they're seeing positive of their spouse and or their friend, whoever is the relationship that we're having, and then say it, name it, and stop.
Mhm.
And I think that the more frequently we do that, we start reducing that negativism, and the person may listen and have that conversation and communication in a more open mind, because you also notice that I'm doing the good things.
Right.
So
Yes.
that's the point.
Mhm.
Absolutely, and acknowledging, kind of like we teach with children and with parents, acknowledging the struggle. I know this is something that it's easy for you to forget. It's not a priority. You know, sometimes you don't do it. I really appreciate you remembering so much recently.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And recognize the effort.
Yeah.
Well, we really appreciate you all being with us today. Thank you so much for being part of another Avant-Garde episode.